1944, the vast Pacific Ocean trembled under the weight of a desperate decision as the Japanese Empire prepared for its final naval gamble, a last ambitious attempt to halt the unstoppable American advance that threatened to crush the empire from all sides. This was a moment built on fear, ambition, and fading hope within the shattered remains of Japan's once proud war machine, and it unfolded during a time when the fate of the Pacific hung in a fragile balance. The Japanese high command knew the tide had turned, but they refused to surrender their navy once the terror of the seas was now a battered shadow, and yet they believed one decisive blow could still force America to negotiate one last gamble that could rewrite destiny. By mid-1944, Japan was cornered from every direction. American forces leapt from island to island, closing in with terrifying speed, and each step brought them closer to the Philippine Islands, a vital lifeline for Japan. Controlling the Philippines allowed Japan to move resources, troops, and oil between its northern home islands and its vital southern territories. Losing the Philippines meant losing the war. The Japanese admirals believed this with absolute conviction, and so they prepared a bold and dangerous plan, one that demanded courage, sacrifice, and the remains of their shattered fleet. The plan that would be known as the Final Japanese Naval Gamble was a do-or-die operation that would either cripple America or permanently destroy the Imperial Japanese Navy forever. The plan was simple on paper, yet brutally complex in reality. Japan would divide its remaining naval forces into multiple groups, each with its own deadly mission. The first group would lure the powerful American carriers away by presenting itself as a major threat. The second group would then slip through the chaos and strike directly at the American landing forces that were invading the Philippines. Their goal was to annihilate the transports, crush the support ships, and slaughter the landing troops before America could fully secure the islands. Japan was willing to sacrifice everything to achieve this, even their beloved battleships and aircraft carriers, even the last trained pilots they had left. This final gamble was built on a tragic truth. By 1944, Japan had almost no experienced pilots left. Years of brutal losses in the Pacific had wiped out generations of aviators. Japan was now training boys barely out of school, giving them only a few hours in the cockpit before sending them into battle against veteran American pilots who had hundreds of flight hours and superior machines. The Japanese admirals understood they could not win through air power, so they relied instead on deception tactics and suicidal courage. The Japanese Northern Force under Admiral Ozawa carried the heaviest burden. This was the decoy fleet. Their task was to intentionally attract the U.S. Third Fleet, drawing it far away from the Philippines. This fleet was composed of the last surviving Japanese carriers, but the dark truth was that these carriers were nearly empty. They had almost no aircraft and even fewer trained pilots. They were hollow weapons, but they served their purpose. They would be bait for the American Navy. At the same time, Japan's most powerful remaining battleships, including the Yamato, the largest and most heavily armed battleship ever built, prepared to strike through the Central Passage. They would attack the vulnerable American transport ships at Leyte Gulf. If they succeeded, thousands of American soldiers would be trapped on the beaches without supplies, without reinforcements, and without support. It could change everything, and the Japanese believed this chance, however small, was worth every drop of blood. As the operation began, American forces landed on Leyte Island, triggering the largest naval battle of the Second World War, a clash so huge it would be remembered as the final showdown of battleships and the last great gamble of the Japanese Empire. American scouts detected the Japanese Northern Force, and Admiral Halsey, convinced he had found the main Japanese fleet, raced north with the bulk of his carriers and battleships. Exactly as Japan had hoped for the first time in the war, Japanese deception had worked perfectly, but fate would not be kind to them for long. The Japanese Center Force, led by Admiral Kurita, now had a clear path toward the American landing zones. They slipped through the San Bernardino Strait with a massive formation of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, including the monstrous Yamato. They sailed under dark skies, haunted by the ghosts of earlier defeats. They believed destiny had finally given them a chance to strike back, and Kurita pushed forward, believing victory was within reach. What he did not expect was the series of brutal battles that awaited him. Before reaching the American transports, Kurita encountered a smaller group of American escort carriers and destroyers known as Taffy 3. These ships were not meant to fight full-size battleships. They were lightly armed, and dangerously exposed, yet they refused to retreat. These tiny American ships charged directly into the Japanese formation, firing torpedoes, launching aircraft, and using smoke screens to disrupt the enemy. Their bravery stunned the Japanese commanders, who believed they were fighting the main American fleet. The chaos of this battle shook Kurita perhaps more than any artillery blast could. The Japanese gunners fired relentlessly, their shells tearing through the sea and sky while the Americans scrambled to survive. This was a moment of pure desperation on both sides, and the outcome would shape the future of the war. The Japanese fleet advanced, but the courage of the small American force created enough confusion to make Kurita believe he had walked into a deadly trap. He hesitated, wondering if the powerful American carriers were nearby waiting to strike. The hesitation grew into doubt, and that doubt turned into a mistake that would doom the Japanese Empire. Kurita made the decision to retreat. He turned back just when victory was within reach. By withdrawing, he abandoned Japan's only real chance of destroying the American invasion force. The final naval gamble had failed, even though the Japanese decoy fleet had successfully pulled Halsey away, even though the battleships had reached the open ocean, even though the moment of opportunity had arrived. The Japanese commanders could not seize it. Their final hope slipped through their fingers like water in the tide. Meanwhile, the Japanese decoy fleet in the north was destroyed almost completely. Admiral Ozawa had succeeded in distracting the Americans, but it cost him everything. His carriers were sunk, his sailors were lost, and the last air power Japan could field disappeared beneath the waves. The sea that once belonged to Japan was now an American battlefield. The empire that once dreamed of dominating the Pacific now watched its ships burn and sink into the cold, dark deep, never to rise again. When news of the failure reached Tokyo, despair filled the war rooms. The admirals knew the truth, even if they would not speak it aloud. The Imperial Japanese Navy was finished. Their fuel reserves were nearly gone. Their shipyards could not replace the losses, and their pilots were too few and too inexperienced to challenge American planes. The final naval gamble meant to save Japan had only hastened the end. The empire had sacrificed everything and received nothing in return. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, the heart of Japan's final gamble, became the beginning of the end. Within a few months, American bombers would strike Tokyo. American fleets would approach the home islands, and Japan would face the terrifying reality of defeat. The Yamato, the pride of the Japanese Navy, would be sent on a one-way suicide mission in 1945, a final gesture of hopeless resistance before being sunk in a storm of American bombs and torpedoes. This was the tragic final chapter of a navy that once ruled the Pacific with unmatched power and confidence. When historians look back, they see the final Japanese naval gamble as a moment defined by bravery, desperation, and doomed ambition. It showed the fierce determination of Japanese sailors who fought against impossible odds, and it revealed the strength of American forces that refused to surrender even when outgunned and outnumbered. It was the final clash of giants, a battle where courage and sacrifice filled every wave and every explosion. Across the ocean, in the end, the Japanese gamble failed because war had already passed the age of battleships. The future belonged to aircraft carriers, submarines, and overwhelming industrial power. Japan could no longer match the vast factories of the United States, nor replace the experienced soldiers and pilots they had lost early in the war. The final gamble was not just a military mistake, it was a tragic symbol of a nation forced into impossible decisions by the weight of fate and time. Today, the final Japanese naval gamble stands as one of history's greatest what-if moments. What if Kurita had continued his attack? What if the American forces had broken under the pressure? What if Japan had succeeded in destroying the landing force? These questions will echo through history, but the answer remains the same. The gamble failed, and with it, the empire began its final descent into defeat.